So I want to welcome a dear friend of mine, Quan Huynh, and he's not an attorney. He certainly knows he's had plenty of experience with attorneys. But when we're talking about anything to do with business or life or personal development, taking 100% responsibility is key. Because if you don't, then everything is outside of yourself and you don't have control. So whether you created the mess or somebody else did, if you have a problem, it's your problem to fix. And we are all people and we have all screwed up. Some little, some big. And the people that I see who own their shit, they do better in life and they're happier, they're more content. They just do better. And we can talk about taking responsibility all we want. For me, there is no one who embodies that better than Quan. And he is the author of Sparrow in the Razor Wire, which is one of my deserted island books. If I'm on a deserted island and I can only take 10 books with me, this is coming. It really is a book that needs to be read about once a year. And Quan has learned his lessons in life the hard way. So I won't tell the story, Quan. Can you give a Reader's Digest, as much as you can, about what happened January of 1999?
Yeah. January of 1999, I shot and killed a human being by the name of Minh Nguyen and tried to shoot and kill his three friends in Los Angeles. It was after a nightclub incident with some of my friends. And I ended up shooting and killing one man and then injuring two others that were in the car with him.
And you were pretty quickly caught. And
about 5 months after, 4 or 5 months after the murder, I was arrested and tried for the death penalty.
Yeah. So you were tried first-degree murder, which, I mean, it was. And you were only convicted of second-degree murder because
I lied at trial, because I coached witnesses, and because I got rid of evidence.
And, there's some people who might be listening to this that, they're done at this point and they have nothing to gain from continuing listening. They'll shut off at that point. And you know what? That's fine. That's their loss, because not what you did immediately afterwards, because it took a while for you to start absorbing what had gone on with your life. So you go to prison, and
Yes.
I'll back up and say, yes, of course, Quan had childhood trauma. That's a given. And of course, there were bad things that happened in his life. And quite frankly, we're not going to talk about those because it's not really relevant. And everybody has had stuff in their life that they could go back and point to and say, this happened and this happened. So you're in prison, and for quite some time, you didn't have remorse, right?
I did not. Yeah, I would have to say probably at least the first 10, 11 years of my sentence, there was no sense of remorse, no sense of accountability. I justified it in my mind, saying it was my life or theirs. This is what happens with gangs, and a million other excuses of why I was where I was at.
Yeah. And something started to kind of switch, though, in your head. So tell me about when you just started, for lack of a better term, kind of, and I'm making this up, this isn't from you, but kind of hearing a voice of something could be better, something could be different, right? So tell me about when that kind of started.
It was right around the time, I would have to say, my niece was born. It was my younger brother's daughter. I got a picture of her. This is probably the 10th or 11th year of my sentence. And I got a picture of her. It's a newborn baby picture. And it just took me right back to my childhood. I saw like an image of like my brother. She looked just like my brother, except it was a baby girl. And I remember asking myself, like, how did my life end up this way? Am I meant to die in here? And and how did it end up like this? And it was around that same year I also heard that my grandfather passed away. It was my father's father. And that also reminded me of my own father who passed away when I was 13. And I just thought like, this is not what my family had wanted for me. How did I end up like this? Yeah, that's when those questions started coming into my mind. Another thing that did help me escape during my prison experience was I've always been a bookworm. So even throughout my years transferring from one prison to another, I was always reading different books. And I had this habit of I finish a book if I really enjoy it, then I go into the acknowledgments section or the back part and I see what other books do they reference, how are they influenced, and then I find books that sound interesting and I go down these rabbit holes on different topics. So it was during that time, I can't remember what books I was reading. I know they were like books on business or entrepreneurship or something like that. And somehow I ended up stumbling on these books about saints, and in particular, saints that had failed in some way or another in their lives, yet each of these saints went on to create like amazing legacies. And I was very drawn to these stories. And so then I go down these rabbit holes, start reading about different saints and what they do. And then, which led me into books on spirituality. And then I land on books on mindfulness and accountability and personal responsibility. And they all just, I would have to say, like made a perfect storm in my mind of how I was viewing my life, even while incarcerated.
And to be clear, like you're in for life. This is not a situation where you're like, oh, let me learn about being an entrepreneur so that, you know, when I'm released, I can go do something. Like that's not on the table at this point.
No, because in the state of California, they had not paroled one single life term prisoner since 1977. There was a landmark ruling that came out in 2007 that basically it was a woman prisoner that fought all the way to Supreme Court, and it was ruled in her favor that like there should be something to distinguish the difference between a life with the possibility of parole and life without the possibility of parole. And the Supreme Court came out with like these parameters that they say factors of suitability, which, you know, factor of suitability meant somebody that had a perfect prison record, never had a violence in their past. This was their first arrest. Like all these factors of suitability, and I did not fit any of those. Then they had things of factors of unsuitability, you know, gang member, multiple arrests, terrible prison record. I fell under every single one of those. So even when that ruling came out, I go, this does not apply to me or apply to the vast majority of the men here. By 2010, I think the numbers were still like less than 1% of California prisoners were being found suitable. Most of these were men that had done upwards of 30 years in their 60s and 70s and had not ever gotten written up or any prison write-ups or anything. But even those that were found suitable still had to go to the governor, and the governors, because it's a politicized process, would just hold a date and say, no, I can't let him go. I can't let him go. So it was almost like a sham. So for me and my mindset and the mindset of most men around me, we're not going home. Like there's a little bit of hope, but we're not going home.
And yet you kept on pursuing this line of reading and exploring.
Yeah, that it helped me to escape the monotony of prison life. And it made me, it opened my mind to a different way of looking at things, especially when I became very fascinated with these stories on saints, and which led me down this rabbit hole of looking at life differently and looking at conflict differently and owning, like looking at personal responsibility, my choices and how I got there. And I remember even reading and then realizing like it was my choices that got me there. I wasn't born a murderer. So one of my favorite books at the time was this book by C.S. Lewis. And he spoke about choices, and he said, like, it's the innumerable choices that you make over the course of your lifetime can turn you into a hellish creature or into a heavenly creature. And that really resonated with me because I go, yeah, I made a million wrong choices up until the moment that I shot and killed somebody. And I made a million more wrong choices these last 10 years but why can I not choose the correct choices from here on out to make myself into a better person? And that's how I began to view prison life, especially when my head was filled with all these readings and I was standing on the prison yard and just asked myself, like, why does prison have to be punishment? Why can this not be a place where I can remake myself into somebody better, regardless if I'm going to die in here or not? And I realized I could. You talk about that little voice that comes back there. The realization was I can make myself better. And I remember that moment, the sun was coming up over the hills and I was able to feel the warmth. And on the blades of grass, I could see the individual drops of dew. And up above me in the razor wire, that's when I heard a sparrow chirping. And I tell everyone, like, it's been chirping my whole prison term, all those years, and I never heard it. But that day I heard it. And from that day, prison no longer felt like this cold, harsh, ugly place. It began to be a place where I felt I could try to remake myself, that I could connect to other human beings, and that we were all just on a journey. And that's just how I began to approach each day. So, of course, being the bookworm, I get fascinated with books on personal choices and accountability and owning mistakes and how that plays out. And each day remembering, like, okay, it wasn't like, okay, this light comes on and everything's fixed and I know what that all means. And for me, it became a whole process, like messing up each day, going back and maybe not even able to admit or apologize to the person that I harmed or that I was wrong, but I can admit it to myself in my journal and going back the next day, how can I continue to embody what I want to become? And that's just, prison suddenly was not prison. It became a place where I felt I could remake myself into a better person. And this was just a temporary place that I'm at, and I could be the best person I could be one day at a time.
And so with that self-reflection comes feelings, right? And would it be safe? Well, I know it's safe to say that you had not had a whole lot of experience feeling feelings or expressing feelings. That had not been safe for you to do ever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when these feelings start coming up and your entire life has been, don't feel feelings, feelings are bad. How did you deal with that?
Yeah, imagine that, especially in prison where it's basically ingrained into us, or it's believed to be ingrained into us, that we're not supposed to talk about feelings and all that. I felt when I started to feel feelings, like when I started to address feelings, I would have to say, like, become literate in my emotions. I remember one of the first things I had to admit to myself was that, you know what? You were a pretty angry guy. And I never would have admitted that I was angry. I never thought I was angry, because my idea of somebody that was angry was somebody that screams or yells and makes a big scene. And for me, I was like, no, I'm not an angry guy. I just, somebody says something and they say something stupid, so I'll just beat them up or something. And it was just, but I'm not angry. But then I thought about it, I go, man, I was the angriest person walking out here in the world. Like, my friends get in a fight at a club, and because of my own emotional illiteracy of being turned down for a job and not being happy with where I was at in life and everything else that I had stuffed away with regarding my feelings, I decide that it's okay to pull out a gun and shoot and kill somebody, because this will, in essence, relieve this inability to process any of my feelings. So that was very sobering to realize I am angry and I have no emotional literacy. And it was just, being the bookworm, I got involved with reading a bunch of books on that and what does this mean, and how this was never addressed when my father passed away when I was a kid, or how this was never addressed throughout my childhood and then into my adult years, and how I built all these walls to shut everybody out and I guess safeguard my own feelings, and thinking that's the right thing, or that's the masculine thing to do. And it was totally wrong.
And so when there's writing in your journal about, being angry yesterday. And then there's the big kahuna. There's the, I need to deal with January 15th, 99. So how did you own that and feel those feelings? And still, this isn't something that goes away. We're talking about it today. How do you balance owning that and not getting paralyzed in shame? That's what I've dealt with that myself in smaller contexts, but owning it and not just being mired in shame.
When I started to come to terms, I wouldn't even say come to terms, when I started to even touch on what made me capable of committing murder and thinking it was okay. And then looking back into my childhood and just talking about my feelings and checking with a therapist and beginning to process my father's death and grieve it for the first time in like 25 years, that is where some of the feelings started to come around. Like, what else happened here? And how was I capable of this? And how can I ever make amends in this, or how can I ever give this back? And I think it was easy things to hold on to it, and which I did. I held on to that for a few years, even after I began my process of change and transformation. And it was in one of the workshops that I was involved in where they did this exercise called "Who Am I?" And it was like on 10 sheets of paper, I write down who I am, like one word to describe myself. And one of those words I wrote was murderer. And I held on to that, murderer, and I'm a murderer, and I'm terrible, I'm a murderer. And the exercise asked me to drop different pieces of paper and what it would feel like if that title no longer described me. And I remember dropping that word murderer and thinking, what does this mean if I am not this person? What does it mean if I never did this? Or what does it mean? Why do I hold on to this? And I realized, why am I holding on to this? This is a very prideful and egotistical thing for me to still do, especially if I'm talking about like spirituality and saying, understanding forgiveness. And how does this serve me or anybody else around me that I hold on to this, that I can know, that I could never be redeemed. So what's the point of me trying to affect change or how to make an impact around to the men around me? So that
it's almost a place to hide, right?
Yeah.
It kind of was a place to hide.
Yeah, because it's easy.
I'm a murderer, so I'm no good, so I don't have to try.
Yeah, and that was the easy thing, or even the cowardly thing to do, is just hold on to that and say, I'm so unforgivable. I don't deserve redemption. I don't deserve anybody to like me, and it becomes its own self-fulfilling belief. Right. Because if I believe that, then nobody's going to believe in me. Nobody's going to like me, or nobody's going to love me. Nobody's ever going to say that I'm capable of redemption. But I learned right then, like, wait, I'm holding on to this because it's the easy thing to do. And I realized I can let it go because, yes, I committed murder, but I would say I am not a murderer. Just holding on to that, like, that means I'm static. I cannot change. And I believe, especially to my journey, that every human being has the capacity to change, at any given moment, for the worse or for the better, just depending on the choices that each of us makes. And that's where my journey took.
And honestly, this is one of the reasons that I'm interviewing you is, honestly, before I met you, I don't know that I would have signed on to that 100%. I don't know that I would have. Well, I know
that's true. That's truly,
and especially like older people, and we get very judgmental, and it's a way to separate ourselves. And you have changed my head. You've changed my head. Mm. So things are transforming for you internally, which, everybody, for whatever the issue is, they all want the external change. And, I have to laugh because, so did I, but it for real change, it has to be internal, and it goes out, not out in. So you're making these pretty big internal changes. And how did that translate into your life in prison?
I remember
it wasn't all good, was it?
Extensively. No, it wasn't. But I mean, I think it was okay. So I think transforming my inner world actually helped to transform my outer world. Yes, it wasn't all good, but I think it was, I had never felt, yes, I'm doing a life sentence in prison, but yet I have a sense of meaning and purpose in my life for once. I realized that I might be somebody that's forgotten, discarded, written off, but yet I am able to affect change and I can make an impact in my little forgotten corner of the world that nobody would ever know about. But yet I am helping people look at things differently and I'm helping and actually putting goodness into the world for once in my life. And that's just how I felt while I was there the last few years of my incarceration.
And so you start coming up for parole and you're denied, or, because of course. And this is all documented in his book. So if you want the details, well, I tell everybody to read it. If you're an attorney, if you have a bar number, this is mandatory reading, as for everybody else, but certainly for attorneys. And tell me about the hearing where it's very clear the parole board is like, and your attorney she's going to ask for a continuance. Because she's like, we are going off the rails here. And you tell her no. Can you briefly tell me that story?
Yeah, we went into, it was my second hearing. And yeah, it was pretty obvious from the beginning, like the commissioner, she did not like me. She didn't like me from the first hearing. And she was even, in my opinion, more harsh and vicious to me in the second one. Everything I said, she'd throw back at me or tell me like, why don't you just shut up? You sound like a robot. And da, 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 da. That's how she was talking to me. And I didn't know how to respond. And I realized everything that I had practiced and facilitated about communicating effectively with, especially through conflict, was not working with this woman. And I just like, this is not working. I'm getting screwed. And it's just is this going to be a 3-year denial or a 5-year denial? Or is she looking to try to really get me for a 7-year denial at this? So I remember my attorney, she had told me beforehand, I'll call restroom breaks here and there. When I say if I ever ask you that if you need a restroom break, please say yes. That's my sign to say it's time for us to regroup. So she had done it once already, that hearing, and she's called for a second one. Says, look, and I remember the commissioner knew she was up to something. Like commissioner, like you just used the restroom earlier, and she's like, I'm sorry, I have a small bladder, I drink too much water. So we went out, and she just told me like, hey, they are screwing you. This is not a fair hearing. I want to go back in there. I don't feel sick. And she goes, I feel sick. She goes, I really feel sick. I feel sick to my stomach. I feel sick everywhere. I don't want to continue this hearing. So this is what we're going to do. They want to screw you. Any other commissioner would have given you a fair hearing today, but they are going out of their way to deny you multiple years right now. We're not going back in there. I'm going to say I feel sick. And that means they have to redo this hearing. They have to put you back on the calendar. 6 months from now, we'll go back in and hopefully you probably won't have the same commissioner again, but any other commissioner would at least give you a fair hearing. So I remember when she said it, and I knew if we did that, then that would be okay. Yes, this would most likely work, whatever a fair hearing is. But I knew at that moment I have a choice to make. I could choose to do that, or I could choose to go back in. And the part of me that wanted to choose to basically deceive or to go along with it didn't feel right in my gut. Like up to that moment, I just try to practice each day. Like, how am I making an intentional right choice that's in alignment with how I see the world? And I remember going, what if I go back to the yard and people say, what happened? Oh yeah, my attorney got sick, but I would have to lie. So I have to do another choice, and just all tied in. And I go, you know what? What's my ultimate purpose here? So I remember telling her, I go, listen, I was here to hold myself accountable, not to be found suitable for parole. So let's go back in there. And we went back in there and finished out the hearing. And then I remember when they read onto the record, they were saying all these long things. And I was just in a daze until the commissioner said, Therefore, we find you suitable. And I like, Quan, I looked, and my attorney was looking and just smiling at me. Oh my God, they're letting you go. And yeah, that's how it went down.
And the beauty of that, I don't know what would or wouldn't have happened or anything like that, of course. But when you did the right thing, all of the information that you had in front of you was that doing the right thing was going to get you a minimum of 6 months more. The thought of you getting out at that point wasn't on the radar. You did the right thing because it was the right thing and in alignment with who you were, even though it was the harder choice. Right?
Yes.
And they found you suitable for parole, which is astounding. And I want to back up. Well, I'll keep going. Just, you can see Quan is out. Here's what's even more amazing. And I didn't practice criminal law for more than 2 seconds, but you're actually not on parole anymore.
Yes, I got discharged from parole. I was discharged from parole November of last year.
I mean, that's amazing. And with no tricks, no lying, no intimidating witnesses, getting there because you're living in alignment with who you are and truth and taking 100% responsibility. And one of the things that has been on my own personal development work has been interesting to me and frustrating a little bit when I think about it. And when I think about other people is, other people, regardless of what it is, they say they want it. They say they want to learn or they want to take accountability. And at the end of the day, a lot of times they just can't do it. And you coached, for lack of a better term, you coached a lot of inmates when you were in there. And it was coaching on the parole, but it was a lot of personal development work and taking responsibility. And there were a lot, it sounds like more not than went forward, that just couldn't do it. Right?
Yeah.
And so you've had some time now where you've been out, you started a nonprofit, which Defy, which we'll talk about in a second. You started a cleaning business that has been very successful. You have really done deep dives into personal development and teaching. Now that you've kind of stepped back a little bit and can see, what do you see as the difference, if you can pinpoint it, between the people, regardless of their situation in life, who really start owning it and taking responsibility for their lives and saying, I can make my life and I can have peace and joy and freedom and love, and I'm not going to pursue power and wealth and status just for the sake of power and wealth and status, regardless of my situation. What do you see the difference between those people? The people who really are getting it and moving their lives versus not, maybe?
I would say there's a sense of self-awareness. That's a big difference. Perhaps some type of listening to their intuition or that their gut, instead of worrying about what outside people would say or do or think. I just noticed there's like each of the men in there, when they came to yes, there were a lot of men that sat down with me, especially when I helped my first friend get found suitable at the parole board. Most of them wanted, okay, I'm going to sit down with Juan because he knows something, and this is my get out of jail free card, or whatever it is they thought. And I know that's their motivation in sitting with me. But my motivation in sitting with them was more like, I know this amazing secret, it feels like this way of personal freedom already that I've found, and I want to share it with them, whether that's through the lens of sitting down, preparing for the parole board. But if I get them to this place where it shifts their mind and their heart, then when they walk into the parole board, they will say the right things will come out of their mouth. and then they'll be able to demonstrate that they're no longer that same person. But even if they don't go home or not from the parole board, the bigger gift is that they will find this freedom, this happiness while they're here already. That's what I've seen. And it's funny that you bring that up, because I come home and yes, we're all free out here, but yet there's a million things that can tether somebody down with, this narrative of in their head, or their script in their head of, I have to do this, 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 and I identify this, this, this. Therefore, I cannot do this, this, and this. And they're chained to their own, I guess, prison.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you have been, you got out and you could have just stayed under the radar, even, started your cleaning company, stayed under the radar, and you didn't. And that took a lot of courage. Because you started being vocal well before you wrote the book. And that has put you front and center, and it's gotten you some praise, and it's also gotten you some negative. And so tell me why you've made the conscious choice to share your story and put yourself out there, especially when you know that there are some people who are never going to be able to get to even listen, because they're not going to get beyond the Quan committed a murder.
Well, for myself, I just remember thinking, especially every time I go back into prison and the men or women in there find out that I had a life sentence, and they come up and they ask me questions. And within like 5-10 minutes of talking to them, I realized I can help them. I can help them shift their mind so that they don't have to view going home or going to the parole board and being found suitable is the goal. I think the goal should be, being happy and present wherever they are at right now. So for them, when I saw that, I go, this is how I can write my book. Is yes, I was able to help maybe 10, 12 men get found suitable at the parole board before I came home, which is not an insignificant amount. But for me, I think the book was able to will give me an opportunity to scale it out a lot more and reach a lot more different prisons, a lot more different men and women that are incarcerated. To, I'm hoping give them a little spark of hope, or begin the process of transforming their own lives and owning their own choices and finding their freedom while they're incarcerated. Yeah.
And through this experience, what have you learned about people on a pretty basic level? Because it's really easy for people who have never been to jail or prison to not think about anyone in jail or prison, immediately write them off. They're bad people. That would never happen to me. I would never make those choices, which quite frankly, I think that line is a little thinner than most people would like to admit. But what has this taught you, this whole experience taught you about people, not just yourself, but people in general?
I would say people in general do not want to cast themselves in a bad light. People in general want to be liked. People in general want to be accepted. And let's say, little mistakes, or let's say an example is I see this happen quite a bit when, since COVID happened, people get on these virtual calls and somebody will come on late. And instead of just apologizing, okay, look, I'm here late, and owning it, sometimes it's just a small little excuse. Oh yeah, this happened. I couldn't find it, or I couldn't find the link, and why is it necessary? Because they still want to be liked, or they don't want to put themselves in a bad light. And it's a way that hinders, I think, their own personal freedom. Where it's okay, yeah, we're all human, we make mistakes, but so I think people in general don't want to admit to making mistakes, which is very normal. But I think finding where I found my freedom is, hey, you know what? I'm I'm human, therefore I'm not perfect, and I made a million mistakes, and I'm sure I'm going to make another million before I leave this earth. But it's like being okay with it and learning from it and owning it. That's the way I view it.
And isn't, I've always had the belief, I haven't always followed it, but that, if you can't be honest in the little things, you're not going to be honest in the big things. And I always find it interesting when I'll hear somebody, right, making an excuse or about the Zoom call, where it's just like, who cares? That's not but if you're going to not, even if it's not being honest with yourself in the little thing, you're not going to be honest with yourself in the big thing either. And I see people being dishonest with themselves far more than being dishonest with other people.
Yeah.
And those lies we tell ourselves are really damaging. At least the lies I tell myself. And would you say that, you're a completely different person than you were. Are you a happier person than you were when you were in your teens and early 20s?
Oh, yes. Yes. Much, much happier now. I think much more accepting and forgiving of myself. Much more in tune with my emotions and much more in tune with my own needs. I'm more able to have my boundaries and be assertive and communicate them in a way that's healthy and effective, I would have to say. So, yeah, I would say I'm much happier than I was as a teenager.
Yeah. And you wouldn't say this because I know you're humble enough, but do you see people living in alignment with who they really are out there?
Not always.
Always. Come on. I see that so much. And I think that, and a lot of times people don't even, I know myself that I was so out of alignment, I couldn't even tell I was out of alignment because you've done it so long that this is just the way it is. Mm-hmm. And then when you get in alignment, it's like, putting on new glasses that you're like, oh my God, who knew? And so you had a very dramatic rock bottom, right? But it still took you 10 years, 12 years to go, hey, wait a minute, this isn't how I want to live the rest of my life. What would you say to someone who maybe, they don't have that dramatic rock bottom, or sometimes they do? This is an audience of attorneys. We have a huge rate of alcoholism. We have a huge rate of suicide. And quite frankly, when you're so out of alignment with who you are that, you're drinking all the time or you're really contemplating suicide, I don't know that that's so much of a different rock bottom than waking up in prison. Right? Maybe a few different choices, but really, that's out of alignment. Yeah. And so what would you tell them how to just start maybe moving the needle a little bit?
Well, I think when we're saying out of alignment, sometimes perhaps somebody doesn't, there might not be a sense of alignment in the first place. Like, where is my North Star, or what do I want to do, or how do I want to affect change or impact the world? Or, maybe getting clear on these questions for themselves. And then, okay, is this choice that I'm about to make today, or this choice I'm about to make this moment, or whatever it is this in alignment with my purpose or how I want to change the world? So
and
maybe
it's usually the harder choice, right?
Yeah.
It's usually the choice that is much harder, that is going to put you up, ridicule, or because when you started this personal development, you got some flack in prison, right? I mean, this wasn't all like, oh, look at what Quan's doing, and this is awesome, and he's, expressing.
Yeah, no, I think it was more like, look what he's up to now. He's trying to scam, or he's up to no good, or or who does he think he is? Things like that. It's just, but then for myself, it became, because we live, it's in a fishbowl. So it's not like out here where I go to work and that's my coworker, and then that's the extent of our relationship. No, in there it's like, I go to work, that's my coworker. We go back, this is now my dorm mate. I know how they live, I know how they speak, I know how they practice their life, and I know how they put on a different hat when they go to work. So it's all these like a very clear and intimate view and glimpse into somebody's personal life. And I got to see that with everybody around me, and everyone got to see it for me. So I think when this first started happening for me, a lot of people were very skeptical, and rightfully so, because I think up until that moment, I was involved with anything and everything that was considered like, okay, the prison black market and contraband, drugs, tobacco, cell phones, and like I was involved with all of that. But then when I walked away, that's when people were very skeptical. And then when I started getting involved with groups and facilitating groups, I think I remember one group I wanted to get involved with, and I guess it even caused quite an outrage in the facilitating community for that community when they asked like one of the team coordinators, like, do you know who that guy is? Like, we should never let somebody like that into our community of facilitators. But fortunately, the few people that could make that decision believed in me. And I would have to say, they took a chance and believed in me. And I would have to say I became quite an asset for them while in there and since I've been home.
Well, and we're going to wrap things up for the recording on that note. Getting to know you and becoming friends with you has completely shifted me internally and on how I think about other people. Has really shifted. Everybody's redeemable if they choose to be. And I no longer think people can't change. I think anybody can change if they want to. Mm. And here's proof positive. And the good, obviously, you can never bring your victim back. You can't. I mean, you can't. The good that you are doing is amazing. And the lives that you are affecting matter. And that's all I can say. And for those who want to purchase it, I know that Quan has the books go to the prison as well. So if you purchase it, books go to the prison as well, to prisons them. And you don't know who's in there. You don't know who is the next Quan, who can really make change inside and out. And that's what I love is that you decided I can have a great life even if I die here. And wow, I mean, if you can do that there's no excuse for anybody out on the outside. So I want to thank you. And I'll put a link to Quan's book below.